On July 12, 2023, at 8:41 p.m. in my downtown Los Angeles apartment, I died on camera during a live stream with over 80,000 people watching. Let me back up for a second. My name is Marcus. I'm 29 years old, and by the time I died that night, I had built an entire career out of one thing: tearing down the faith I grew up in. I was what they call an exvangelical. Maybe you've heard that term before. It's for people like me who grew up deep in evangelical Christianity and then walked away. But I didn't just walk away quietly. I made it my mission to expose what I saw as the lies, the manipulation, the hypocrisy of it all. I had 1.2 million followers across my platforms: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Every week, I'd go live and we'd pick apart another piece of Christian culture. I mocked pastors and their private jets. I made fun of worship music and how emotional people got during altar calls. I laughed at testimonies, called them psychological tricks, said it was all just crowd manipulation and groupthink. And people loved it. My comment sections were filled with other ex-Christians who felt validated, who felt seen. They'd share their own stories of religious trauma, and I'd tell them, "You're free now. You don't need that anymore." The money was good too, really good. Sponsorships, ad revenue, Patreon supporters. I was pulling in around $350,000 a year. I had a nice apartment in downtown LA, a good life. I felt like I was doing important work, helping people break free from what I called the evangelical machine. That night, July 12th, I was doing a live stream on a topic I'd covered 100 times before. Christianity is brainwashing. It was one of my most popular subjects. I had my notes ready, my coffee next to me, my camera perfectly positioned. The viewer count was climbing fast: 60,000, 70,000, then over 80,000 people watching live. I was in the middle of making a point about how churches use fear to control people. I was saying, they tell you you're going to hell if you don't believe, and that's not love, that's manipulation, that's emotional terrorism. When I felt it, this tightness in my chest, like someone had reached inside my ribcage and was squeezing my heart with both hands. I tried to keep talking, tried to push through it, but my vision started to blur. My face must have gone pale because the chat exploded, messages flying by so fast I couldn't read them. "Bro, you okay? Marcus, what's wrong? Call 911. This isn't funny, man." I tried to say something, tried to tell them I was fine, but I couldn't get the words out. My throat felt like it was closing. My left arm went numb. And then this pain, this crushing, suffocating pain spread across my entire chest. I remember reaching for my phone. I remember the last thing I saw on my screen was my own face, frozen in the camera, looking terrified. And then I remember falling, the floor coming up to meet me, the sound of my chair tipping over, and then nothing. I expected nothing after death. That was the whole point, wasn't it? I'd spent years telling people there was no afterlife, no heaven, no hell, just the end, just darkness, just ceasing to exist. I was wrong. Instead of nothing, I woke up in the very darkness I used to say didn't exist. A darkness so complete, so heavy, it felt like it had weight, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel. And what I felt was terror. Pure, primal terror like I'd never known in my life, because I realized something in that moment. I wasn't alone in that darkness. Someone was waiting for me there. And that was only the beginning. I need to tell you how I got here, because nobody just wakes up one day and decides to build a career out of mocking God. There's always a story behind it. And mine started in a small Baptist church in Tennessee when I was just a kid. My best friend growing up was the pastor's son. His name was David, and his dad, Pastor Jim, ran our church. I spent more time at their house than my own. I was there for every Wednesday night service, every Sunday morning, every youth group meeting. I knew the hymns by heart. I knew all the Bible stories. I could quote scripture better than most of the adults. But here's the thing. The God I learned about in that church wasn't a God of love. He was a God of rules. And my friend's father made sure we knew every single one of them. Don't listen to secular music. Don't watch R-rated movies. Don't hang out with kids who aren't saved. Don't question. Don't doubt. Don't step out of line. And if you did, well, Pastor Jim had this way of looking at you, like he could see straight through to your sin, Like God was watching and taking notes, and you better believe there'd be hell to pay. Literally. I remember being terrified as a kid. Terrified I'd think the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. Terrified that Jesus would come back and I'd be left behind because I wasn't good enough. I prayed the sinner's prayer probably 100 times just to make sure it took. My parents weren't much help either. My dad was strict, ex-military, believed in discipline and order. My mom was quiet, went along with whatever the church said. They loved me, I think, but they loved the idea of raising a godly son more. I felt like I was always performing, always trying to be the good Christian kid they wanted me to be. I felt like church loved my performance, not me. Everything changed when I was 16. That's when I found out what the people at church really thought about my family. My parents were going through a rough patch, money problems, mostly. My dad had lost his job, and we were struggling. I didn't tell anyone at church because I was embarrassed, but somehow one of the youth leaders found out. Her name was Mrs. Patterson. She led the high school small group, always talked about how we were all family in Christ, how we could trust each other with anything. So when she pulled me aside one Sunday and said she'd heard about my dad, I thought she was going to pray with me, thought she was going to help. Instead, 2 weeks later, I overheard her in the church parking lot talking to another mom. I was walking to my car after youth group, and I heard my name. I stopped behind a van where they couldn't see me. Marcus's father lost another job, Mrs. Patterson was saying. I'm not surprised, honestly. You can tell they don't have their priorities straight. They haven't been tithing properly in months. The other woman laughed. Well, you reap what you sow, right? Maybe if they put God first instead of their lifestyle, He'd bless them. I stood there frozen. These were the people who'd been teaching me about Jesus since I was 8 years old. These were the people who smiled at me every Sunday, who told me God loved me, who prayed over me. And behind my back, they were judging my family, gossiping about our struggles, blaming us for our own suffering. I never told my parents what I heard that night, but something broke inside me. I started seeing things I'd never noticed before. The way the church celebrated the families who gave the most money. The way Pastor Jim drove a brand new truck while families in our congregation were struggling to pay rent. The way people competed over who had the most impressive testimony, the most dramatic conversion story, the loudest worship. It all felt fake, performative. Like everyone was playing a part in some show, and I was the only one who could see through it. When I left for college, I left the church behind too. I told my parents I was still going to campus ministry, but I wasn't. I was taking philosophy classes instead, reading Nietzsche and Dawkins and Hitchens, hanging out with people who asked questions instead of demanding blind faith. I had this professor, Dr. Reynolds, who taught a class on religion and society. He was the first person who ever told me it was okay to doubt. That doubt wasn't sin, it was intelligence. He introduced me to the idea that maybe, just maybe, Christianity wasn't divine truth. Maybe it was just another system humans created to control other humans, and that idea felt like freedom. I found communities online, other ex-evangelicals who'd been hurt by the church, people who'd been kicked out for being gay, or shamed for getting divorced, or traumatized by purity culture. We shared our stories. We validated each other's pain. We told each other, you're not crazy, you're not broken, you were lied to. And somewhere along the way, I stopped just processing my own pain. I started getting angry. Really angry. At the church that had hurt me, at the God who'd let it happen, at every Christian who still believed the lies I'd finally seen through. I started making videos. At first, they were just rants, me sitting in my dorm room talking about why I left the church. But people watched, people commented, people shared their own stories, and I realized I had something here. I called my channel Freed Minds. The tagline was, Deconstructing Faith, One Lie at a Time. And it grew, fast. I figured out the formula pretty quick. The videos that got the most views weren't the thoughtful ones about theology or church history. They were the ones where I mocked things, where I took clips of famous preachers and ripped them apart, where I made fun of worship songs and called them emotional manipulation, where I shared the most extreme, most ridiculous examples of Christian hypocrisy I could find. Mock Jesus. Go viral. That was the formula. And I told myself I was doing it to help people, to expose the truth, to save people from the pain I'd been through. But honestly, I liked the attention. I liked the money. I liked being seen as smart, as brave, as the guy who had it all figured out. By the time I was 25, I'd quit my day job. I was making six figures from ad revenue and sponsorships. I had a team helping me produce content. I was getting invited to speak at secular conferences. I was someone. But I was also falling apart. I couldn't sleep. Most nights I'd lie awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, my mind racing. I'd scroll through comments, through messages, through my analytics. I'd pour myself another drink to try to quiet my thoughts. Then another. Then another. I tried pills too. Nothing hardcore at first, just stuff to help me sleep, to help me focus, to help me get through the day. But it became a routine, a necessity. I couldn't function without something to take the edge off. My apartment was a mess. I was a mess. I'd go days without talking to anyone in person, just me and my screens, me and my audience, me and the persona I'd created. I had millions of people who watched me, who liked me, who supported me, but I didn't have anyone who actually knew me, anyone who loved me. Not really. I told myself I was free, free from the church, free from guilt, free from God. But the truth is, I was chained. Chained to my anger, chained to my need for validation, chained to this life I'd built that was slowly destroying me from the inside out. I didn't know it then, but every choice I was making, every video I was posting, every time I mocked the name of Jesus, I was building something. Something that would follow me beyond this life. I didn't know those choices were preparing me for the darkness I'd meet after death. The pain hit me like a freight train. 1 second I was talking, making my point about fear and manipulation, and the next second it felt like someone had reached into my chest and was crushing my heart with their fist, just squeezing it tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I tried to keep going, tried to play it off. I even laughed a little, like maybe it was just stress or I'd had too much coffee. But my voice came out wrong, thin, strained. The chat was moving so fast I could barely read it, thousands of messages flooding in every second. But I caught a few. "Marcus, are you okay? Dude, you look really pale. Call 911, bro. This isn't a joke. Someone call an ambulance." I reached for my phone. My left arm wouldn't move right. It felt heavy, numb, like it wasn't even attached to my body anymore. I tried to grab my phone with my right hand instead, but my fingers wouldn't close around it. They just sort of brushed against the screen and knocked it onto the floor. The pain in my chest was spreading now, up into my jaw, down my left side. It felt like my ribs were being compressed in a vise, tighter and tighter, until I thought they might crack. I couldn't get air. I was gasping, my mouth open, but nothing was coming in. It was like trying to breathe underwater. The room started spinning. The lights from my ring light and my monitor were too bright, burning into my vision. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ears, like I was hearing it through a tunnel. And then I fell. I don't remember deciding to stand up or lean forward or anything like that. I just remember the sensation of falling, the floor rushing up to meet my face, the sound of my chair tipping over behind me, a crash as my arm hit the desk and sent my coffee mug flying. I hit the ground hard, my cheek pressed against the cold hardwood floor. I could see under my desk, cables, dust, a protein bar wrapper I'd dropped last week. That's when things started getting strange. The sounds around me began to change. The noise from my computer, the hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen, the distant traffic outside my window. It all started to slow down, like someone was dragging reality into slow motion. Everything became deeper, distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. My body felt impossibly heavy, like I weighed 1,000 pounds, like I was made of stone sinking into the floor. I tried to move my hand, just lift one finger, but nothing happened. I was completely paralyzed. I could still see my monitor from where I'd fallen. The screen was tilted at an angle now, but I could make out my camera feed. I could see myself lying on the floor. The chat was absolute chaos. Emojis and all-caps messages and people screaming at each other to call for help. My heart was still beating. I could feel it. But it felt wrong. Too slow. Too hard. Each beat was like a drum in my chest, getting farther and farther apart. Thud, thud, thud. And then something shifted. I can't explain it any other way. It was like I was suddenly in two places at once. I could still feel the floor under my cheek, still feel that crushing weight in my chest, but at the same time, I was rising, lifting up, separating. And then I was looking down at myself. I was floating near the ceiling of my apartment, looking down at my own body, crumpled on the floor. My face was gray. My eyes were half open but not seeing anything. One arm was stretched out toward where my phone had fallen, like I'd been reaching for it when I collapsed. It was the strangest feeling I've ever experienced. I knew that was me down there. That was my body, my face, my apartment. But I didn't feel connected to it anymore. It was like looking at a video of someone else, distant, separate. I tried to call out, tried to say something, but I didn't have a voice anymore. I didn't even have a mouth. I was just awareness, just consciousness floating in the space above my body. That's when I heard the sirens. They were faint at first, but getting louder. Someone must have called 911. Maybe one of my viewers tracked down my address somehow, or maybe my neighbor heard the crash when I fell. I don't know. I watched as my apartment door burst open. Two paramedics rushed in. A man and a woman in dark blue uniforms. They were shouting at each other, moving fast, dropping bags of equipment on the floor next to my body. The man put his fingers on my neck, checking for a pulse. He said something to the woman. I couldn't hear the words. It was like watching a movie on mute. I could see their mouths moving, see the urgency in their faces, but the sound wasn't reaching me anymore. The woman ripped open my shirt, buttons scattered across the floor. She pulled out these white pads with wires attached and stuck them on my chest. The man was doing compressions now, his hands locked together, pressing down on my sternum over and over. I watched them work on me. Watched the woman pull out a needle and inject something into my arm. Watched the man tilt my head back and force air into my lungs with a bag valve mask. And I felt nothing. No pain, no fear. No connection to what was happening down there at all. I started to float higher. The ceiling of my apartment was coming closer, and I thought I was going to hit it, but instead, I passed right through it, like it wasn't even there. I could see the apartment above mine now. My upstairs neighbor was standing in his kitchen, looking down at his floor, probably wondering what all the noise was about. I could see through the walls, through the building, through everything, and then the world started to change. The colors began to drain away. My apartment, the paramedics, the furniture, everything was losing its color, fading into shades of gray, like an old black and white photograph. The walls started to blur at the edges, becoming less solid, less real. My computer monitor, still streaming to those 80,000 people, was flickering. The light from it was stretching, bending, turning into a tunnel of light that spiraled away into somewhere else. I felt myself being pulled, not physically, because I didn't have a physical body anymore, but pulled nonetheless. Like gravity, except it wasn't pulling me down, it was pulling me into something, away from this place, this reality, this world. Everything was dissolving around me. The shapes of the room were breaking apart, fragmenting into pieces that didn't make sense anymore. The sounds, even though I couldn't hear them properly, were fading into silence. Complete, total silence. And I was falling. Not falling down, but falling through layers of reality that I didn't know existed, through the space between things, through the cracks in the world. The last thing I saw was the light from my apartment, that warm yellow glow from my lamps and my computer screen, shrinking into a tiny pinpoint in the distance, getting smaller and smaller until it was just a star, and then it blinked out. And then everything collapsed into darkness, a darkness that felt alive. The darkness I found myself in wasn't like any darkness I'd ever experienced before. It wasn't darkness like when you turn off the lights at night. It wasn't darkness like a basement or a cave or closing your eyes. This was different. This darkness had weight. It had presence. It pressed against me from all sides, like I was being buried alive in something thick and suffocating. I tried to look around, tried to see anything, any shape or shadow or hint of light, but there was nothing. Absolute zero. Complete absence of light. And it was silent. Not quiet. Silent. There's a difference. When it's quiet, you can still hear things if you listen hard enough. Your own breathing, your heartbeat, the ringing in your ears. But this was the total absence of sound. Like sound itself had ceased to exist. I didn't have a body anymore. Not a physical one anyway. But I was still me. I could still think. I could still feel. And what I felt was terror.
I tried to move, but I didn't know how to move without a body. I tried to call out, but I didn't have a voice. I was just consciousness, suspended in this crushing, suffocating darkness. And then I realized something that made the fear even worse. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but I knew. The way you know someone's standing behind you, even when you can't see them. The way you know you're being watched. There was something else in this darkness with me. That's when I heard the first voice. It was my voice, but not my voice now. It was my voice from one of my videos. That slightly smug tone I used when I was making a point I was particularly proud of. Religion is for the weak. The words echoed through the darkness, not like a normal echo, more like the darkness itself was repeating them, turning them over and over, examining them. Religion is for the weak, for the weak, for the weak. Then another voice, also mine, from a different video. Nothing happens after you die. It's just lights out. Game over. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. And another. Wake up, sheep. You've been lied to your entire lives. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. My own words were coming back to me. Every mocking statement I'd ever made, every joke at Christianity's expense, every time I'd laughed at someone's testimony or called salvation a fairy tale for adults who couldn't handle reality. It was all there, all of it, playing on repeat in the darkness around me. But it wasn't just playback. These voices had presence. They felt alive, like entities made out of my own words, circling me, pressing in closer. I tried to block them out, tried to make them stop, but I couldn't. They kept coming, faster and faster, overlapping each other until it was a cacophony of my own voice, mocking everything I'd spent my life mocking. Jesus is a myth. Christianity is brainwashing. Heaven and hell are just control mechanisms. You're all victims of ancient propaganda. And underneath it all, I could feel something else. A presence, darker than the darkness, colder than cold. Something that wasn't just repeating my words, but savoring them, feeding on them. That's when the weight of what was happening hit me. This was real. All of it was real. I had been wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. There was something after death, and I was in it. The despair that crashed over me in that moment was worse than any fear I'd ever felt. Because fear is about what might happen. Despair is about what has already happened and can't be undone. I had spent years telling people there was nothing after death. Convincing them that faith was foolish and God was imaginary and they could live however they wanted because there were no consequences beyond this life. And I had been wrong. I thought I'd be fine. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I was the smart one, the enlightened one, the one who'd seen through the lies. I wasn't. And now I was here, wherever here was. The voices around me began to change. They weren't just my voice anymore. They were other voices, whispers coming from every direction at once. This is what you taught others. This is where your influence led them. How many believed you? How many followed you away from the truth? I wanted to scream, wanted to defend myself, wanted to say I didn't know, I didn't understand, I was hurt and angry, and I thought I was helping people. But I had no voice here, no defense, no excuse that mattered. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then I felt them, presences, moving in the darkness, not visible, but there. I could sense them the way you sense movement in your peripheral vision, shapes that weren't quite shapes, forms that had no form. They were closing in around me. I felt something brush against what would have been my arm if I'd had an arm. It wasn't a physical touch, but I felt it nonetheless, cold, so cold it burned.
And with that touch came a sensation I can barely describe, like something was trying to claw into me, not into my body, but into my soul, into the very essence of what I was. More of them now, surrounding me on all sides, reaching toward me, pulling at me, trying to drag me down. Down to where? I didn't want to know, but I could feel it beneath me. Something worse than this darkness, a place of absolute separation, absolute torment, absolute loss. A place where these presences were trying to take me. I tried to fight them off, tried to pull away, but there was nothing to fight with and nowhere to go. I was helpless, completely and utterly helpless. Time stopped meaning anything. I don't know if I was in that darkness for seconds or hours or days. It felt eternal. It felt like it had always been this way and would always be this way, like I had never existed anywhere else and never would. The whispers kept coming. You rejected the truth. You mocked his name. You led others astray. You had every chance. You knew. And the worst part was, they were right. I had known. Deep down, underneath all my anger and hurt and pride, I had known. I'd felt conviction gnawing at me in the quiet moments. I'd had dreams where I was standing before God and couldn't defend myself. I'd had thoughts that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. But I'd pushed them away, buried them, drowned them out with more content, more anger, more performance. And now here I was. The presences around me were getting stronger, more aggressive. I could feel them pulling me down with more force now, dragging me toward that place beneath the darkness, toward what I was starting to understand was hell. The real hell. Not the cartoonish version with red devils and pitchforks, but separation. Absolute separation from anything good, anything true, anything that could offer hope or comfort or love. I was going there, and I deserved it. That thought hit me like a physical blow. I deserved this. Every moment of torment, every second of this crushing darkness, I had earned it. Not because I'd broken some arbitrary rules or failed to perform the right religious rituals, but because I had known the truth and rejected it. Because I had been given grace and thrown it back in God's face. Because I had used my influence to pull others away from the only thing that could save them. The darkness around me seemed to contract, crushing in tighter and tighter. The whispers became screams. The presences became more violent, more desperate to claim me. This was it. This was the end. Not just of my life, but of any hope, any possibility of redemption, any chance of escape. I was lost, completely and eternally lost. And then something changed. The darkness, which had been pressing in on me from all sides with crushing weight, suddenly recoiled, like it had been pushed back by something. The whispers cut off mid-scream. The presences that had been clawing at me retreated. Something was coming. Someone was coming. The darkness itself seemed to recognize it, seemed to fear it. I didn't know if this was better or worse, because whatever could make this darkness afraid must be more powerful than anything I could imagine. And it was coming for me. The darkness hadn't gone away, but something was happening inside it. Images began to appear, not like watching a screen, more like I was being pulled into memories, into moments from my life, except I wasn't just remembering them. I was experiencing them again, fully, completely. This was my life review.
The first image that came was one of my videos, a TikTok I'd made about 6 months before I died. I remembered filming it. I'd been in a good mood that day, feeling clever. The video was me reacting to a clip of a pastor talking about salvation. I'd added sarcastic captions, made exaggerated facial expressions, ended it with a joke about how Christians were terrified of thinking for themselves. It got 2.3 million views, thousands of comments. People loved it. But now I wasn't watching it from my perspective anymore. I was watching it from someone else's. A young guy, college age, maybe 19 or 20. He was lying on his bed scrolling through his phone late at night. He'd grown up in church. He'd been baptized when he was 12, but lately he'd been having doubts, questions his youth pastor couldn't answer, struggles with faith that he felt guilty about. He came across my video. I felt what he felt as he watched it. The initial surprise. Then the nervous laughter, then something shifting inside him, a door opening, a voice in his head saying, "See?
"You're not crazy. This whole thing is fake. You can let it go." He watched more of my videos that night, hours of them, and with each one I felt his faith cracking, piece by piece. Everything he'd been taught, everything he'd believed, it was all becoming a joke to him. Not because he'd reasoned his way out of it or studied theology or even really thought it through, but because I'd made it look stupid. I'd made belief look weak and foolish and beneath him. By the time he fell asleep that night, he'd decided. He was done with Christianity, done with church, done with God. And I felt his relief, his sense of liberation. But underneath that, I felt something else, a deeper current of loss he wasn't even aware of, like something precious had just been torn out of him and he didn't even know it was gone.
The scene shifted. Another person, a 14-year-old girl this time. She was having an argument with her mom about going to youth group. She didn't want to go, said it was boring and fake and all her friends thought Christianity was stupid. Her mom asked her where she was getting these ideas. She pulled up my channel on her phone, showed her mom one of my videos where I was mocking worship music, making fun of how emotional people got during altar calls. I felt the mom's heartbreak, the confusion and fear as she watched her daughter slipping away, the desperate prayers she prayed that night, begging God to protect her child's faith. But I also felt the daughter's contempt, the way my videos had given her ammunition, a sense of intellectual superiority over her own mother. She wasn't just questioning faith anymore, she was despising it, despising the people who believed, and that contempt came from me. I'd planted it there. The scenes kept coming faster now, person after person, moment after moment. A man in his 30s who'd been going through a divorce. He'd started going back to church, finding some comfort there. Then he found my content. Within a week, he'd stopped going, told himself it was all just emotional manipulation anyway. The brief hope he'd felt was replaced with cynicism. And underneath that cynicism, a deeper despair he tried to drown with alcohol. A woman in her 20s who'd been abused by a church leader when she was younger. She'd been working through that trauma, slowly separating the abuse from her faith, trying to find God again outside of that toxic environment. Then she watched one of my long-form videos about institutional church corruption, and something in her just broke. She couldn't separate it anymore. It all became poison to her. Every memory of faith, every prayer, every moment of hope, it was all contaminated now. And I felt her pain, the raw, aching wound of it. The nights she lay awake hating herself, hating God, hating everything. The thoughts of ending it all because she couldn't find solid ground anywhere anymore. I tried to pull away from these scenes, tried to make them stop, but I couldn't. This was my life. These were the consequences of my choices, and I had to face every single one. A teenager who started cutting himself after watching my content. Not because of anything I said directly, but because I'd taken away the one thing that had been keeping him tethered. His youth pastor had told him God loved him, that he had a purpose. I'd convinced him that was a lie. And without that belief, he had nothing left to hold on to. A college student who'd been on the edge of faith, asking hard questions, but still seeking. My videos gave him permission to stop seeking, to give up, to close that door. He walked away from the campus ministry that had been supporting him through his depression. 3 months later, he dropped out of school. 6 months after that, he was homeless. A mother who'd been praying for her son's salvation for years. She finally got him to agree to go to church with her one Easter Sunday. He went. Something touched him during the service. He was close, so close, to responding to the altar call. But the night before, he'd been binge-watching my videos. And my voice was in his head during that service, mocking everything, making it all seem like a psychological trick. He didn't go forward. He never went back. She never stopped praying for him. She never knew I was the reason he stayed away. Each scene cut deeper than the last. Because I wasn't just seeing what happened. I was feeling it. Every emotion, every thought, every consequence. I experienced their confusion when their faith started to crumble, their anger at feeling betrayed by the religion they'd grown up with, their emptiness when they walked away and found that the freedom I'd promised them felt more like abandonment. And worse, I felt their eternity. Some of them were still alive, still had time to turn back, but others had died. Car accidents, cancer, suicide. And I felt where they went, felt the same darkness I was in closing around them,
felt their realization too late that they'd been lied to, not by the church, but by me. I wanted to scream, wanted to tell them I was sorry, that I didn't know, that I thought I was helping them, but my excuses dissolved before I could even form them, because the truth was staring me in the face. I had known.
Maybe not consciously. Maybe I'd buried it deep, but I'd known. Every time I made a video mocking Jesus, there was a small voice inside me saying, "What if you're wrong? What if he's real? What if you're leading people away from the only thing that can save them?" And every time I'd silenced that voice, pushed it down, drowned it out with more content, more anger, more performance. The scenes kept coming, but now they were showing me something else. The spiritual reality behind my videos, what they really were, stripped of all the justifications and rationalizations I'd wrapped them in. In the physical world, they were just content, just entertainment, just videos on a screen. But in the spiritual world, they were weapons. Every joke was a dagger. Every mocking word was an arrow. Every video was an assault on the souls of the people who watched them. And I'd launched thousands of these attacks. Millions of them if you counted every view, every share, every comment thread where my words were repeated and amplified. I saw the demons that had been working through me. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought the ideas were mine, the anger was mine, the clever arguments were mine. But they weren't. I'd been a tool, a mouthpiece, a weapon wielded by forces I didn't even believe existed. And they'd used me well. I saw the people I'd hurt. Not just the ones who'd walked away from faith, but the ones who'd stayed. The believers who'd seen my videos and felt their confidence shaken. The parents who'd watched helplessly as their children consumed my content and grew cold toward God. The pastors who'd had to counsel people through crises of faith that I had caused. The weight of it was crushing, absolutely crushing. If I'd had a body, I would have collapsed under it. The guilt, the shame, the horror of seeing what I'd really done, it was unbearable. And underneath it all was one terrible, undeniable truth. I had rejected the very God who could have forgiven all of this. I had mocked the only name that could save me. I had laughed at the cross, which was the only thing that could have covered my sins. And now it was too late. The life review slowed. The images began to fade. But the weight of what I'd seen remained. The knowledge of what I'd done, who I'd hurt, where I'd led people, it was all seared into my consciousness now. I could never unknow it, never unsee it, never escape it. I was guilty. Completely, utterly, irredeemably guilty. And I was getting exactly what I deserved. The darkness began to close in again. The presences I'd felt before were returning, ready to drag me down to that place beneath the darkness, that place of eternal separation, eternal torment, eternal regret. This was justice. This was right. This was the natural consequence of everything I'd chosen. I'd spent my life rejecting God. Now he would give me what I'd asked for, an eternity without him. The darkness pressed tighter. The descent was beginning. And then, just as I was about to be pulled under completely, just as the last shred of anything resembling hope was about to be extinguished forever, something happened. The darkness split open with a blinding light. The light that tore through the darkness wasn't like any light I'd ever seen. It wasn't bright like the sun or harsh like a spotlight. It was pure, absolute. It didn't just illuminate the darkness. It consumed it, dissolved it. The crushing weight that had been pressing down on me from all sides simply ceased to exist in the presence of this light. And the light wasn't empty. It wasn't just photons or energy or some impersonal force. It was a person. I knew it the instant the light appeared. This wasn't energy. This wasn't consciousness or the universe or any of the abstract concepts I might have been willing to accept. This was someone real. Someone powerful beyond anything I could comprehend. The presences that had been clawing at me, trying to drag me down, they fled, scattered like roaches when you turn on a kitchen light.
The whispers that had been tormenting me fell silent. The darkness itself recoiled, shrinking back from this presence like it was in pain. And then I saw him.
I can't describe what he looked like, not because I didn't see him clearly, but because human language doesn't have words for it. He was more real than anything I'd ever encountered in physical life, more solid, more present, more there than anything I'd ever known. But it was his eyes that undid me. They weren't angry, though they had every right to be. They weren't cold or distant or indifferent. They were looking at me with a depth of knowledge that was terrifying. He saw everything. Every video I'd made, every word I'd spoken, every person I'd hurt, every time I'd mocked his name, every opportunity I'd had to turn back that I'd rejected. He knew it all, saw it all, understood it all. And yet, underneath that knowledge, there was something else, something I didn't expect and didn't deserve. Love. Not the shallow, emotional kind of love I'd mocked in my videos, not the love is love bumper sticker philosophy I'd been comfortable with. This was something else entirely. This love was fierce, overwhelming. It had weight and power and presence. It was the kind of love that could create galaxies and hold atoms together and still care about one broken, guilty soul standing before it. When he spoke, his voice didn't come from outside me. It came from everywhere, from the air around me, from inside me, from the fabric of reality itself. He said my name, not Marcus, my real name, the name my parents had given me but I'd stopped using years ago because it felt too connected to my church past, the name I'd left behind when I became someone else online. Tyler. Hearing him say it broke something in me, because he didn't just know my name. He knew me. The real me. Not the persona I'd built. Not the character I'd played for the camera. Me. The scared kid who'd been hurt by the church. The angry young man who'd turned that hurt into a weapon. The lost soul who'd convinced himself that destroying others' faith would somehow heal his own wounds. He knew all of it. And he still said my name with such tenderness that I wanted to weep. But then he continued. Tyler, you used your gift to pull my little ones away from me. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Undeniably, irrevocably true. I'd had a gift. I'd been good at communication, at connecting with people, at making complex ideas accessible. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't just talent or practice. That was something given to me. For a purpose. And I'd taken that gift and used it to lead people away from the only source of life and hope and salvation in the universe. His little ones. That's what he called them. Not followers, not believers, not Christians. His little ones. Like a father talking about his children. And I had hurt his children. I tried to speak, tried to explain. The words were forming in my mind, all the justifications I'd been building for years. I was hurt by the church. They were hypocrites. I thought I was helping people think for themselves. I didn't know you were real. But the words died before they could form, because in his presence, they weren't just weak. They were irrelevant, meaningless. The excuses that had felt so solid, so justified, so righteous in my own mind, they crumbled to dust when exposed to the truth of his presence. I had no defense, no explanation that mattered, no excuse that could stand. I was guilty. If I'd had a body, I would have collapsed. Instead, I felt myself breaking. Not physically, but spiritually. Everything I'd built, everything I'd convinced myself of, everything I'd used to justify my choices, it all shattered. And I wept. I don't know if spirits can cry, but I did. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place deeper than emotion. This was the grief of a soul confronting its own condition. The unbearable weight of seeing yourself clearly, maybe for the first time, and realizing how far you've fallen. I had rejected him. Not out of ignorance, but out of pride. I had known deep down that he was real.
I'd felt his conviction. I'd heard his voice in those quiet moments, and I'd chosen to silence it, to bury it, to mock it publicly so I could feel justified in my private rebellion. And he knew. He'd always known. He spoke again. "You were not beyond my love, Tyler, but you rejected it."
The words were gentle, but they cut deeper than any condemnation could have, because they reminded me of something I'd forgotten, or maybe chosen to forget. He had loved me. All along. Even when I was at my worst. Even when I was making videos mocking his name. Even when I was celebrating in the comments as people walked away from faith. He had loved me. And I had thrown that love back in his face. "You mocked what you did not understand." That was it, wasn't it? I'd thought I understood Christianity. I'd grown up in it. I knew the Bible stories, the theology, the culture. I thought I'd seen through it all, seen the manipulation and control and hypocrisy beneath the surface. But I hadn't understood anything, not really. I hadn't understood the holiness of God, the weight of sin, the cost of redemption. I hadn't understood that the cross wasn't a symbol or a story or emotional manipulation. It was the only thing standing between humanity and the darkness I'd just experienced. I hadn't understood that grace wasn't weakness, it was power. The power to forgive the unforgivable, to love the unlovable, to save the unsavable. I hadn't understood any of it, and in my ignorance I'd convinced others to reject it too. The weight of that realization should have crushed me, should have sent me spiraling back into that darkness where I belonged. But something else happened instead. He reached out and touched me. I don't know how to describe it. He didn't have hands, not physical ones, but I felt it nonetheless, a touch on what would have been my shoulder. And the moment he made contact, everything changed. The guilt that had been suffocating me, it was still there, but something was happening to it. The shame that had been crushing me was being lifted. The darkness that had been clinging to me, those shadows of sin and pride and anger and rebellion, they began to crack, to break apart, to dissolve in the presence of his touch. And for the first time since I'd died, maybe for the first time in my entire life, I felt loved. Not the conditional love of performance and approval that I'd experienced in church as a kid. Not the shallow affirmation I'd gotten from my followers online. This was different. This was love that knew exactly how broken I was. Exactly how guilty I was. Exactly how much damage I'd done. And still refused to let me go. This was grace. I didn't deserve it. I knew that. I deserved the darkness. I deserved the torment. I deserved eternal separation from everything good and beautiful and true. But he was offering me something else. He spoke again, and this time his voice had a different quality. Still gentle, but with authority, with purpose. "I gave you influence for a reason, Tyler. My influence, my platform, the 1.2 million followers, the reach I'd built. I'd thought it was mine, my accomplishment, my success. But it wasn't. It had been given to me. For a reason. A purpose I'd twisted and corrupted and used for my own agenda. Now go back." Go back? Back where? To life? To my body? Was that even possible? And use it for truth. The words settled over me like a mantle. Heavy. Weighty. This wasn't just a second chance. This was a commission. A calling. I was being sent back with a purpose. To undo the damage I'd done. To use the influence I'd built for destruction and turn it toward something else. Toward truth. Toward him. I wanted to ask how. Wanted to ask if it was even possible to turn things around after I'd gone so far in the wrong direction. Wanted to ask if people would even listen. But before I could form the questions, he spoke one more time. Go. And the moment he said it, everything changed. The darkness that had been held back by his presence, it didn't just retreat, it collapsed, shattered like glass struck by a hammer. The space I'd been suspended in began to fracture, breaking apart into fragments that spun away into nothing. I was falling again, but this time it was different. I wasn't falling into darkness. I was falling toward something, being pulled back to my body, back to life, back to the world I'd left behind when my heart stopped on that July evening. The light of his presence was fading, but I could still feel it.
still feel his hand on me, still hear his voice echoing through my consciousness. Go. And I went. The first thing I felt was pain, not spiritual pain, not the crushing weight of guilt or the terror of darkness. Physical pain. Sharp, burning, aching pain radiating from my chest through my entire body. I couldn't breathe. Someone was pressing down on my chest, hard, rhythmic compressions that felt like they were cracking my ribs. Maybe they were. I tried to gasp, tried to pull air into my lungs, but nothing was working right. Then suddenly, violently, my body convulsed. Air rushed into my lungs. I choked, coughed, my whole body seizing as it tried to remember how to be alive. I heard voices, distant at first, then clearer. We got him back. We got a pulse. 6 minutes. He was down for 6 minutes. Get him stabilized. Let's move.
I tried to open my eyes, but the light was too bright. Fluorescent. Harsh. Nothing like the light I'd just been in. This light was cold and clinical, and it hurt to look at. My chest felt like it was on fire. Every breath was agony. My ribs screamed with each inhale. Later, I'd find out they'd cracked 3 of them doing CPR, but in that moment, all I knew was pain. Hands were on me, moving me, lifting me onto a stretcher, strapping me down. Someone was shining a light in my eyes. Someone else was putting an oxygen mask over my face. The plastic smelled sterile and wrong. I was in an ambulance. The siren was wailing above me. A paramedic was leaning over me, checking my vitals, adjusting IV lines in my arms that I didn't remember them putting in. "Can you hear me?" she was asking. "Sir, can you hear me? What's your name?" I tried to answer, but nothing came out. My throat was raw. My tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. She kept talking, kept asking questions, but I couldn't focus on her words because all I could think about was where I'd just been. Him. I'd been with him. I'd been in his presence. I'd felt his touch. I'd heard his voice. And now I was here, back in this body, back in this world. Back in pain and confusion and the smell of antiseptic and the wail of sirens. The contrast was almost unbearable. We arrived at the hospital. They wheeled me through automatic doors into the emergency room. Bright lights overhead, doctors and nurses moving quickly around me, someone cutting off my shirt, cold gel on my chest for an EKG, needles, monitors, voices calling out numbers and medical terms I didn't understand. I just lay there, tears streaming down my face. Not from the physical pain, though that was intense, but from something else, something deeper. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be back there, in his presence, where everything made sense, where I finally understood, where I felt loved for the first time in a way that made every other experience of love in my life feel like a cheap imitation. But he'd sent me back, told me to go, given me a mission, and I had no idea how to do it. They moved me to a room eventually, the ICU, hooked me up to a dozen different machines, put me on oxygen, gave me something for the pain that made everything fuzzy at the edges but didn't really make it go away. My mom arrived first. I heard her before I saw her, her voice in the hallway asking where I was, if I was okay, what happened. Then she was in the room, rushing to my bedside, grabbing my hand, sobbing. "Tyler, oh God, Tyler. I thought I'd lost you." I squeezed her hand weakly, tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. She was praying, out loud, thanking God that I was alive, begging him to heal me. Her faith hadn't wavered, even though I'd spent years trying to tear it down. She'd never stopped praying for me, never stopped believing that somehow, someday, I'd come back. And she had no idea that her prayers had just been answered in a way she couldn't possibly imagine. My dad showed up next. He was quieter than Mom, but I could see the fear in his eyes, the relief. He stood at the foot of my bed, one hand on the rail, just watching me breathe like he couldn't quite believe I was still here. Over the next few hours, other people filtered in. A couple of old friends from high school, my building manager who'd heard the commotion and called 911, one of my neighbors who'd been interviewed by the police, and then some of my Exvangelical friends showed up. 3 of them. People I'd made videos with, people who'd been part of my journey out of faith. They came in joking at first, trying to lighten the mood, saying I'd given everyone quite a scare. But then my mom mentioned that I'd been clinically dead, 6 minutes with no heartbeat. And one of them, Jake, he made a comment. Well, at least you know now. Nothing on the other side, right? Just lights out. Must be nice to have proof. He was smiling when he said it, like it was a given, like of course I'd come back confirming everything we'd always believed. I looked at him and tried to speak. My voice came out as barely more than a whisper, hoarse and broken. I was wrong. The room went quiet. Jake's smile faltered. What? I was wrong about all of it. My other friend, Amanda, stepped closer to the bed. Marcus, you're on a lot of pain meds right now. You probably just had some weird hallucinations. That's normal with oxygen deprivation. I shook my head even though it made the room spin. It wasn't a hallucination. I saw him. I met him. Met who? Jake asked, but his tone had changed. He wasn't joking anymore. He sounded defensive, uncomfortable. Jesus. You could have heard a pin drop. Amanda laughed, but it was nervous, forced. Come on, man, you're not serious. I am. Jake took a step back from the bed. You coded. Your brain was starved for oxygen. You had a near-death experience, which we know are just neurological events. Your brain was dying, and it gave you some comforting imagery based on your childhood conditioning. That's all it was. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw myself. The version of me from a week ago, so certain, so sure that I had it all figured out, so convinced that everyone else was deluded and I was the one who could see clearly. I know how it sounds, I said quietly. I know what we always said about NDEs, but Jake, I'm telling you, it was real. He was real. No. Jake's voice was harder now, almost angry. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to go through something traumatic and then fall back on the same religious programming we all worked so hard to break free from. That's regression. That's trauma response. Amanda put a hand on his arm. Jake, he just died. Give him a minute. That's exactly why we can't give him a minute, Jake shot back. This is when people are most vulnerable, when they backslide, when they let fear drag them back into the superstition they fought so hard to escape. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't understand, that this wasn't fear or trauma or oxygen deprivation, that I'd seen things, felt things, experienced things that were more real than anything in this room. But the words wouldn't come. My throat was too tight, my body too exhausted. And honestly, I knew it wouldn't matter. I'd spent years building the walls Jake was hiding behind right now. I knew how strong they were, how comfortable they felt, how threatening it was when someone tried to tear them down. So I just closed my eyes and let the tears fall. They left shortly after that. Jake and Amanda and the third friend whose name I can't even remember now. They were uncomfortable, confused, maybe even angry. I'd violated an unspoken rule of our community. I'd betrayed the cause. My mom moved closer to the bed after they left. She was crying again, but differently now. These weren't tears of fear or relief. They were tears of joy. You met him? She whispered. You really met Jesus? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. I knew it. I knew he'd reach you. I never stopped praying, Tyler. Never. I looked at her, at the faith shining in her eyes, the faith I'd mocked and belittled and called delusional for years. And I realized she'd been right all along. She'd been praying to someone real, someone who'd been listening. Someone who loved me enough to let me hit rock bottom and then pull me back from the edge. The nurses made everyone leave eventually. Visiting hours were over. I needed rest. But I couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, in that darkness, seeing the damage I'd done, feeling the weight of all those souls I'd influenced, hearing his voice telling me to go back and use my influence for truth. How was I supposed to do that? My whole platform was built on tearing down faith. My entire audience followed me because I validated their rejection of God. My income depended on creating content that mocked Christianity. If I turned that around, I'd lose everything. My followers, my income, my reputation, the respect of the community I'd built. But more than that, I'd lose my excuse. As long as I kept quiet, I could pretend this didn't happen. I could tell myself it was just a hallucination, just trauma, just my brain misfiring. I could go back to my comfortable life of certainty and anger and performance. But he'd given me a mission,
And deep down, I knew I had to fulfill it, not because I was afraid of going back to that darkness, though I was, but because I'd seen the truth. And once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend. You can't go back to living a lie. I had to tell them. All of them. My followers, my friends, my audience. I had to tell them I was wrong. The thought terrified me, but the thought of facing him again and having to admit I'd been too afraid to obey terrified me more. So lying there in that hospital bed, broken and exhausted and still in pain, I made a decision. I was going to tell my story. All of it. The death, the darkness, the life review, meeting Jesus, everything.
And whatever happened after that, whatever the cost, I'd accept it. But the real miracle wasn't that I came back. It was what happened after. I was discharged from the hospital 4 days later. The doctors wanted to keep me longer, run more tests, make sure my heart was stable, but I couldn't stay. Every hour I spent in that hospital bed felt like wasted time. I had work to do, a mission I'd been given, and I was terrified that if I waited too long, I'd lose my nerve. The first thing I did when I got home was open my laptop. My apartment still smelled like the paramedics had been there. There was a stain on the floor where I'd spilled my coffee when I fell. My camera was still set up, still pointed at the empty chair where I'd been sitting when I died. I sat down in that chair, logged into my accounts, and I started deleting. Every video where I'd mocked Jesus, every post where I'd called Christianity brainwashing, every piece of content where I'd used my platform to pull people away from faith. I went through years of work, video by video, post by post, and I deleted it all. My phone started blowing up almost immediately. Messages from my team asking what I was doing, comments from followers confused about why videos were disappearing, emails from sponsors asking if my account had been hacked. But I kept going. Delete, delete, delete. It took me 6 hours to remove everything. 6 hours to erase what I'd spent 6 years building. And with each video that disappeared, I felt lighter. Like I was shedding weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. When I was done, my channel was almost empty. Just a few older videos from before I'd really gotten into the anti-Christian content. And one new video slot waiting for me to fill it. I knew what I had to do next, but I was terrified. I set up my camera. Same angle, same lighting, same setup I'd used for hundreds of videos, but everything felt different now. I hit record. My name is Tyler Marcus, and I need to tell you what happened to me. That video was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than dying, harder than facing Jesus in that darkness, because I knew what it would cost me. I told them everything. The heart attack during the live stream, the darkness, the life review where I saw the damage I'd caused, meeting Jesus, his words to me, the mission he'd given me. And then I said the words I knew would end my career. I was wrong about all of it. Jesus is real. God is real, and I spent years leading you away from the only truth that matters. I didn't rehearse it, didn't edit it, just spoke from my heart for 20 minutes and uploaded it. The video was titled, "I Died During My Live Stream, and Jesus Met Me in the Outer Darkness." I posted it, and then I waited. The response was immediate and brutal. Within an hour, I had thousands of comments. Most of them were angry, accusing me of having a mental breakdown, calling me a fraud, saying I'd sold out, that I'd been bought by Christian influencers, that I'd betrayed everything we stood for. My Exvangelical friends were the worst. Jake made a response video calling me a trauma victim who'd regressed into childhood programming. Amanda wrote a long post about how sad it was to watch someone they respected fall back into delusion. My subscriber count started dropping, fast. 10,000 gone in the first day, 20,000 by the end of the week. Sponsors pulled their deals. My Patreon supporters canceled their subscriptions. Within a month, I'd lost half my audience and almost all my income. But something else was happening too. Other comments started appearing, different comments. I was about to leave the faith. Your video stopped me. I've been an atheist for 10 years. After watching this, I prayed for the first time since I was a kid. My son walked away from church because of your old videos. I'm sending him this one. People were messaging me privately, telling me their stories, how they'd been hurt by the church, how they'd walked away, how they'd watched my old content and felt validated in their rejection of faith, and how this new video had cracked something open in them, made them wonder if maybe they'd been wrong too. The video went viral. Not in my old community, they wanted nothing to do with it, but in Christian circles it spread like wildfire. Pastors were sharing it, youth groups were watching it together, people were using it to reach friends and family who deconstructed their faith. Within 3 months, it had over 5 million views, more than any video I'd ever made.
But the numbers didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered were the messages, the stories, the people who were finding their way back to Jesus because I'd finally told the truth. I started going to church again. Not the church I grew up in, a different one, a place where I could sit in the back and just listen, just learn, just heal. It was hard at first. I'd spent so many years critiquing worship music, analyzing sermons for logical fallacies, looking for hypocrisy and manipulation. But slowly, I learned to just receive, to let the truth wash over me without analyzing it, to worship without performing. I got baptized again. Not because my first baptism didn't count, but because I wanted to publicly declare what had happened to me, who I was now, what I believed. My mom was there. She cried through the whole thing. I started reading the Bible differently too, not looking for contradictions or problems or things to mock, but reading it as what it actually was, God's Word, His message to humanity, His story of redemption that I was now part of. I memorized Scripture, started praying. Not performance prayers for videos, but real prayers, honest conversations with God where I confessed my struggles, my fears, my gratitude, and the addictions that had controlled me for years, the alcohol and pills and compulsive behaviors I'd used to numb the emptiness. They started losing their grip. Not all at once. It wasn't some instant miracle, but day by day, prayer by prayer, I found I didn't need them anymore. I had something real to fill the void now. I found a new community, people who knew my story, knew what I'd done, and loved me anyway, who held me accountable when I struggled, who encouraged me when I doubted, who reminded me of the grace I'd been shown when I felt like I was failing. My relationship with my parents healed. The distance I'd put between us, the years of tension and disappointment, it all started to melt away, not because they'd changed, but because I had. I could finally see their faith for what it was, not weakness, not delusion, but the most courageous thing anyone could have. Trust in a God I'd now met face to face. I created new content, but it was different now. I wasn't performing anymore, wasn't trying to go viral or build a brand or maintain an image. I was just sharing what I'd learned, what God was teaching me. The journey of someone who'd been as far from faith as you could get and was now trying to find his way back. Some of my old followers came back, not many, but some, and they'd message me saying they'd been watching from a distance, seeing the change in me, wondering if maybe what I'd experienced was real. And I'd tell them the same thing every time. It is real. He is real. And if he could reach me, he can reach anyone. But I want to talk to you now, not my old followers, not the Christians who've been sharing this video. You, the person watching this who's where I was. Maybe you grew up in church and got hurt. Maybe you saw hypocrisy and it drove you away. Maybe you had questions nobody could answer. Maybe you felt like God let you down. I get it. I lived it. I understand the anger and the hurt and the sense of betrayal. But I need you to hear this. You think leaving God makes you free. It doesn't. I thought I was free. I thought I'd broken the chains of religion and found liberation. But I was more enslaved than I'd ever been. Enslaved to my anger, to my pride, to my need for validation, to the emptiness I was trying to fill with everything except the one thing that could actually fill it. Real freedom isn't found in rejecting God. It's found in surrendering to Him. And I know that sounds like the kind of religious talk we used to mock. I know it sounds like manipulation or control or whatever terms we use to dismiss it. But it's the truth. The deepest, most fundamental truth in the universe. Jesus is real. He loves you, and He's calling you, not because He needs you, but because you need Him. Because without Him, you're heading toward the same darkness I experienced, and that darkness is more terrible than anything you can imagine. But here's the good news, the gospel, the actual good news. You don't have to go there. You don't have to experience what I experienced. You don't have to die to meet Him. He's here, right now,
waiting for you to turn back, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to let him love you the way he's always wanted to. I wasted so many years, hurt so many people, did so much damage, and he still took me back, still forgave me, still gave me a second chance. If he did that for me, he'll do it for you.
It doesn't matter how far you've gone. It doesn't matter what you've said or done or how many videos you've made mocking his name. It doesn't matter how much you've convinced yourself that faith is foolish and believers are deluded. He's still calling you. I hear from people every day who are in the same place I was, angry, hurt, convinced they're right and everyone else is brainwashed. And I understand. I really do. But I'm begging you, don't wait until you die to find out the truth. Don't wait until you're standing in that darkness, realizing too late that everything you rejected was the only thing that could save you. Turn back now, while you still can, while there's still time. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. Hell is real. And the choice you make about him in this life determines where you spend eternity.
I almost spent eternity in that darkness. And the only reason I didn't is because he had mercy on me. Because he gave me another chance. Because he sent me back with a message. This is that message. Come home. He's been waiting for you. Your whole life. Through every detour and every rejection and every moment you ran the other direction, he's been waiting. And he's still waiting now. Take a moment after this video and talk to God. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you were wrong. Tell him you want to know him. That's all it takes. Just that honest conversation. That humble admission that you need him. He's been waiting to hear those words from you. Don't make him wait any longer.